wait a couple more minutes, see if we get some more people in here.
That sounds good. I know it's Wednesday evening for those on the East Coast, and starting evening for those on the West Coast. Middle of the week, end of the month, first month of the year.
Oh, thanks, Reagan, for changing that.
Are you listening in from Aaron? It's great in here. Great.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. We'll probably get some people trickle in as we go along. Thanks for joining us, guys. So this is Neil Smith. He's a regenerative agriculture advisor and consultant, building resilient farm systems. So he's collaborated with farmers worldwide, replacing outdated practices, um, creating solutions and resilience to the farming industry. He's also experienced with blockchain products, with specifically with Kohima. They leverage decades of experience alongside emerging technologies like Web3. So he's been empowering farmers to harness data-driven tools, decentralized systems, and community networks to unlock their land's full potential. So exciting stuff, combining all the tech with regenerative agriculture, which is no easy task. So a little introduction to Neil, and feel free to ask questions, guys, in the chat. Let us know if you have any questions. But Neil's got a list of questions ahead of time that a couple people asked. But Neil, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. That's appreciate the intro, and there's sort of a lot packed into that. So I feel very blessed to be here today and continuously pinch myself in the work I get to do, aligning between technology and my passion, which is agriculture. So I've had experience in upstream agriculture and downstream, and I like to talk about myself more as an agroecologist than completely hanging my hat on any one principle. But I favor the direction of regeneration within environmental aspects, within our farming systems. And a lot of the work I do is designing those systems and helping those systems be implemented, and then tweaking the systems. And where technology comes into play, and really where the love blockchain is everything that we do from the ground level all the way up has a data aspect to it, and that data can be then put onto the blockchain to create more trust, more conversations, and really allow for different mechanisms, particularly in the food supply chain and the agriculture systems. And that's what I get to do day in, day out. So in essence, that is a little bit about me. I thought maybe I'll just give you an interesting fact today. I was talking to a mushroom farmer that's doing a controlled environment mushroom operations, or running one. And I've known a lot about mushrooms, but I actually didn't know that they could create their own wind. So I don't know if any of you knew that out there. Unlike a lot of animals or scenarios of wind that spreads spores or help with propagation of different plants. Mushrooms do this by themselves. They actually create a little mini convection system by releasing water vapor, which cools the air around them and creates that wind scenario to help pollinate and spread their pores. So mushrooms create their own wind. Who knew? It's fascinating. I do have some questions that were put into the Discord channel that I'll help to get the conversation started. And as people trickle in, we can build upon that. Or if you have any follow-ups to the questions that were posed. The first one is, how do you see RFK and the new administration affecting this industry? Bioregionally focused, more American or North American related? Great question. I really believe that RFK Jr. is going to change the conversations that are happening, and that specifically is going to help promote what we're doing in the agriculture space and nourishing the world in a different way. Those conversations are going to be around how we nourish our body and the health, creating mechanisms that we haven't had readily available to us in terms of the government initiatives or those that are leading us accepting some of the pushback that has happened. So we all know there's broken systems all over the place. I don't like to point fingers at anyone. It really is about flipping the narrative. We can have better outcomes, and it starts with really deep and meaningful conversations. One of the books I've read recently is called Good Energy, Dr. Means, and she said in there that I'm just going to pull that up really quickly here. I have a quote that I wrote down in relation to that, but it ties into how RFK Jr. and the new administration is really going to help change conversation. So obesity doctors and pediatricians are not calling to lower the recommended added sugar for children to zero. They're saying obesity is a brain disease and the government should subsidize barbaric surgeries and pharmaceutical injections to help manage it. That quote stuck out to me in the book when I read it. I went, whoa, that's a key one. Really what we're talking about is how do we nourish ourselves? How do we take control of our own health by utilization of nutritious food, which is really where I think the conversation piece flips. Every institution that impacts your health makes more money when you're sick and less when you're healthy. Depending on where you are in the world, or even in what state you are within America, I think this has ups and downs of aspects of truth. But at the end of the day, we need to figure out how to create mechanisms that everyone is self-empowered to find better health through nutrition. And for me, being in agriculture, that means understanding where our food comes from, and then furthermore, connecting with those that are growing or producing our food and have a better understanding of the life that they're leading. My hope is through the utilization of emerging technology like blockchain, the use of looking at data differently and trusting data that's immutable in the blockchain, that will actually invite more people back into agriculture. We will have more engaged agriculturalists that are wanting to grow healthy food, creating more bioregional, seasonal food that is going to really empower each and every one of us to be responsible for our own health, but also change the way we access food, so that it has a ripple effect or a domino effect all the way through. So that's how I see RFK Jr. really sort of opening up the opportunities for us to flip the narrative and shake up the conversations that are there. I also think the administration as a whole, without getting political, I try to stay apolitical. I am based in Canada, I work around the world, but specifically with the new administration, there's a lot of green lights specifically related to blockchain, crypto, and enabling a more decentralized economy to take root. And I'm really encouraged by what I hear from the new administration and some of the indicators that are coming that there's going to be more acceptance to the utilization of crypto and even embedding blockchain more fully into our societies so we can actually have more confidence in the data that's there, in particular coming from the farm and in how we grow food. So those are maybe some answers to that question. That is a fairly large question. We could spend the whole time talking about it, but to tie it back to agriculture. There was another great question that came up, and it sort of spawns into that, which is the green lights for blockchain, and what do we see next for the Grow blockchain? So on the Grow blockchain, there's many different projects. I have a project on there. It's called Kohima, which is a consultancy that's helping farmers, meeting them where they're at, and helping them transition to more regenerative practices or more sustainable practices that are going to lead to regenerative outcomes for the ecosystem. So ecology and agriculture system alignment. I often focus a lot of my attention right at the farm field when I'm speaking with farmers. I usually underline capital F farmers because I'm inclusive. And so whether you're a rancher, whether you're a cropping system, whether you're a market garden servicing a smaller region, whether you're controlled environment or anything in between, there's a connectivity to what we do on the Grow blockchain, and specifically how Kohima is helping support the plans, the designs, the plans, the implementation to these regenerative systems. I think the question that often comes up it's maybe coming up as a question later, but what are those systems, or what are those steps that define regenerative? I mentioned already that I don't necessarily hang my hat as having to follow every methodology that's currently defined as regenerative, that I'm accepting of sustainability and organic systems. But for me, there's a sort of a hybrid that kind of falls in there. And there's sort of 7 steps that I realize to help frame up how we look at these regenerative systems. And I do use the word systems. I believe agriculture is the most complicated system of systems that we build, and it takes a lot of observation and a lot of awareness of what's going on within the land that you're stewarding. So the first thing I always talk about is context. What are we trying to do with the land? What are the pieces that we understand? So do we understand the soil health? And for me, we're trying to get soil to a functional state versus a degraded or often just forgotten about state that is very dependent on inputs. What kind of biodiversity is within your ecosystem? So diversity is a term that's come up a lot vis-a-vis the carbon market space in terms of trying to monetize some of that data. Blockchain can help with that and controlling, but right at the ground level, and part of my questioning and my assessment work that I do in relation to the context and the very first step in understanding how do we move towards more regenerative systems. And regenerative, you can actually think about as a system that is self-regenerating. That's where we want to get to. Is it's almost the easy button that we get to hit. We get the ecosystem working more effectively the way it was intended to, and then we can insert ourselves back in a more wholesome way, as opposed to trying to push in the environment or controlling the environment that is demonstrated to us that's had adverse effects. So understanding your soil health, moving more towards functional soil health is the outcome. Biodiversity, how many birds, critters, different kinds of flora, fauna, phytology is another way of expressing that, are around. What kind of resiliency does your operation, in a lot of cases this would be a farm-related text question that I focus on. There's resiliency and there's adaptation to the environmental aspects, some of those aspects that are within our control in terms of supply chain demand, market space, go-to-market opportunities, or the catch basin for your product coming off the farm. So what kind of resiliency do you have? Can you weather through a flood system? Can you deal with a change in market space adaptation, whether new supply chains are coming in or new distribution channels are being cut off? These are going to be indicators of how long your longevity run or your runway is, and we need to certainly understand that from a context piece. Farming practices, what are you currently doing already? I like to meet farmers where they are, and I don't think any farmer that I've ever talked to, um, they're purposely doing anything that is contrary to helping support growing good food. I think a lot of farmers are chasing yield. So we're chasing quantity, obviously, because we get paid, or a lot of farmers get paid off of that. And this aspect of trying to feed the world is rattling around in the brain, and volume and quantity is the driving factor. Yields or bushels, if you're speaking more cropping terms and farm terms, pounds per animal unit, if you're in the livestock game. And so really understanding those practices would be part of that context piece that we have to understand. If you do have animals, that's wonderful. It's one of the key things that I really like to try to integrate if you're not using animals. It sounds a little bit scary for people that are more cropping system or into vegetables or orchards or viticulture, grapes, wineries. But animals are very much a part of our ecosystems, and integrating them in a slow fashion and a stepping stone is certainly going to help improve our efforts as we move towards more regenerative states. And so understanding those grazing systems, your livestock management, animal welfare, and pasture recovery, in terms of what are they eating, how long do you need to let that pasture or area that they're grazing or feeding off of rest before you put the animals back on. So we call this rotational planning. Birds, if you have multiple different species, can they all graze together? Can they be separated? If you are using a finishing facility for cattle, what does that look like in terms of how long you leave them there? When do you bring them in? All of these components we talk about. On the cropping side, we talk about crop rotation. And the thing I like to point out here, for those that are familiar with cropping, but certainly for those that aren't, is that when we actually get to regenerating the soils and it becomes functional, you don't need to rotate crops. Soils can handle corn upon corn upon corn planting. The reason we rotate crops is that we've depleted the soil, we've driven out the microbiology from the soils, and so they're more prone to pests and diseases, and so we need to rotate to help mitigate some of those issues that we've caused. And we haven't done so to hurt society or the food. We've done so to chase the yield and feed the population, the growing population. But now we're at this inflection point where we need to start thinking about returning to a more regenerative, more nature-based way of farming. Capital F, underline that, all inclusive. And this often is an understanding that our soils are very degraded, and desertification is something that is very real within North America, South America, within Europe, and we certainly need to focus on how we improve the soil. To me, I think everything from our healthcare system, through our food supply chain, to the food you eat, our agriculture systems, it all starts and stops with the soil. And we really need to have a strong focus on that. So soil fertility, and how well the soil is becoming functional, which has an aspect of water management. And I'll get into a question that was asked about some water systems in Utah in particular. But soil is the key linchpin there. On the goals, certainly, we go in, I think a lot of agriculturalist farmers get a bit nervous about all these consultants and all these ag tech companies and all the agronomic supports that are whittling away at the bottom line to get the knowledge to help implement the systems. And so we really need to understand the economic goals for your operation. And I think about it from diversifying your operational balance sheet. And again, I bring back blockchain. This is a great chance for introduction of how we can leverage blockchain. We can create more meaningful mechanisms for diversification of monetized opportunities that are going to help support farm operations. And then community dynamics. So where you're located in relation to your community, social, economic, and how rural or how close to urban centers. This has a impact on some of the direct consumer opportunities, as well as just the well-being, the mental well health of our farmers and their families that spend many hours on a farm and a lot of times solo. I know I've worked a farm and worked on a ranch, and you spend a lot of time with yourself and I, and so we need to think about the mental health and the mental well-being of that. And so community dynamics and support systems are very important in understanding the context as how we think about regenerating farms. Then we get into some of the more, I would say, fun aspects. So that seems a bit heavy, and we think about the good, bad, ugly as we go through those questions. But minimize disturbance on the fields. So we really want to get away from. See a question in here just about traceability and carbon credits. I'll get to that in a second. Great question. Going back to the sort of the steps of regeneration, minimizing soil disturbance. For me, this is really understanding the equipment. So if you've got heavy machinery on there, you're maybe in a production operation, a larger farm operation, creating tramways or minimizing the amount that we drive this heavy equipment on the field, creating compaction, which is really killing the soil. We can go to smaller implements. It's something that I talked a lot about to different operators. There's a lot of beeline equipment that's out there, smaller in operation, that has less weight and less compaction, and we can maybe get 2 or 3 tractors running on the same field as opposed to one big one, pulling huge seeders or huge sprayer systems. Again, everything we can do to minimize the soil disturbance, compaction being one of them. The other one would be tilling. This is a practice that's been around for many decades. We're moving into a no-till agriculture sort of mindset. There's minimum till. Depending on the crop types, we're needing to help the lawn as it creates functionality in the soil. So sometimes minimum till is acceptable with different systems that are going to continue to add benefit to move us more to a regenerative state. But minimizing soil disturbance, huge one. Number 2, how we're doing that and what mechanisms are there. Third one is armoring, what I call armoring the soil. And really that's all about keeping the soil covered year round. And so no longer should you be driving by fields that are barren and just dirt. There's many different reasons for that. Wind is going to take our topsoil away. We really farm in the top 2 to 3 inches of our soil, and that's very important. And by and large, most of our topsoil has blown away in most of our farming areas in North America, and this is very true in different bioregions around the world. So cover crops are very important, and it doesn't have to be one species, multiple species, getting different root structures in the soil. It's going to have different micro and macro nutrients that are released, different sugars, different aspects of benefits in terms of helping the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. And so arming the soil really helps us ensure that we are on a year-round basis protecting what is there and helping it reestablish itself even after our cash crops are sown in our grazing crops. And then diversity, more we think about what we call champion cropping, so multiple crops that we plant that we're going to harvest. So cover crop, by and large, is there to protect the soil. We can crimp that down or we can graze it down. And that biomass, when we crimp it, is going to add wonderful nutrients as it gets decomposed into the soil. If you graze it down, the same aspect is happening. Hooves of the livestock are pushing the biomass into the ground. Again, it's all about that decomposition and creating microbiology that is going to continue to help feed and nourish the soils, which in turn is going to create more nourishing plants. And for those plants that we are harvesting, processing, and eating, it's going to be more nutritious plants. We get to diversity, really understanding and working with specialists to understand the types of plants that can be grown in your region, those plants that work well together in terms of root structure, playing off each other. This helps ward off pests. It helps ward off the amount of inputs that we put down. Biological, so there's this big movement to get away from synthetics, which I fully agree on. And then we get into this place called nature-based inputs. And I think this is an area that a bit confusing to some people. There's worm castings, so worm poop that you can put on, which is very nature based. There's biologicals, which is us using science to help us create that microbiology. I call these bridge products. At the end of the day, when we get to full regeneration, we shouldn't be applying anything, but we understand that we need to help our systems along, our soil systems in particular. And so these bridge projects have an application and a place. And so mirroring that with the right crops, champion crops, and different growing periods is really going to help create that diversity. Keeping a living root in the soil, this goes along with armoring the soil and just better mechanisms for microbiology and helping the biome down there. So I often talk about getting to the root of it all. This is for carbon. So we can do a lot of baselining and measuring and soil sampling and utilizing technologies like geospatial satellite recognition and taking a look at vegetative indexes to help us really understand what's happening with the carbon cycle. So how much carbon is going into the ground, how much we're sequestering, how that's helping function. And so with carbon, there's a few things to think about. The carbon market space, and by the way, I spent some time in the carbon market space working with an MRV, a measure, record, and validate technology that was measuring the soil of non-soil disturbance. So we weren't actually disturbing the soil. We were using a very light side-by-side, and we were driving over it, and we were scanning down to 30 centimeters with accuracy and collecting carbon signals that were coming back up and giving us an indication of what was happening in soil from a carbon aspect. There were some other micro elements that we were able to recognize as well, but primarily it was for carbon. But I think carbon, it's a big talk of the town right now, and there's a lot of momentum about how we monetize, and that monetization, is supposed to help the farmers, again, capital F farmers, all inclusive. But I think this system has veered away from the original vision. So I'm often one that is saying that I'm disillusioned by the carbon market space that is today. I loved the vision, I loved where we were heading, and I think it's gone too far the other direction. I think there's a big messy middle between the farmers and how we actually monetize the aspect of carbon. And that's everyone in the middle. And I'm not trying to poke fingers on it. I just think that there's a very confusing, messy middle in there, and it's actually having an adverse effect. So working with the blockchain, we're actually able to create different narratives and conversations around how we can help with trust of data that is then going to be monetized and more rewards going back to the farmer for the sequestration or the carbon avoidance. So if you're doing livestock methane avoidance, if you're working with trees, there's a forestry component to the carbon sequestration. There's biodiversity credits that are on the market now. And so really understanding what we're trying to reward in terms of how we're improving our overall climate aspects from the carbon that we know is being released, and we need to keep more of it in the ground. But I really want to challenge all of you that are on today, and I appreciate all of you that are here, to think about carbon, not so much just how much carbon are we sequestering or how much are we avoiding, but how well are we creating a better carbon cycle. And so there's a rhythm. There's soil respires, just like human body respires. There's going to be natural releases of carbon that come out as we grow crops. So it's the carbon cycle that we really need to understand, but we can quantify what's going in the ground. And by and large, holding carbon in the ground is a very good thing. It helps create opportunities for different growing mechanisms. It helps create holes or bubbles, if you want to think about it, in the ground that captures water and holds water in place so it doesn't leach off and take our good soils and all the nutrients with it, and has many other positive effects. But as it relates to monetizing that, I would strongly recommend that we have discussions and take this offline, or continue to ask me questions around how we authorize data. So how we do the baselining, how we digitize that data, utilizing great individuals, leaders in the industry in that carbon market space to say, yes, we can accurately measure the carbon that's going into the ground or the methane avoidance. There's calculations and standards we adhere to. And instead of going to this voluntary carbon market where I think things get really messy, we can take it into the blockchain and we can create things such as carbon NFTs, or we can monetize that data that better serves the farmer and also is meeting those climate initiatives. So those conversations are changing because of the blockchain and how we can accelerate rewards back to the farmer to continue, putting together these great practices. I also say landowners, there's people that don't necessarily farm but are stewarding their land to create a carbon sink, creating forestry systems that are drawing down a lot more carbon than a farm field would. So all of that is very important. Did that answer your question there? Just around some of those carbon credit pieces, high level? Perfect. Appreciate that. Just reading here some questions. Perfect. So the other thing related to carbon is this validation piece. And so when we think about validators, there's definitely having to have an understanding of a standard. So the calculations that go in to help quantify all the pieces of the data. And I think there's some great companies out there. We're working with a few, or Grow Blockchain is working with a few. And I call it a fairly streamlined chain of command. So a farmer or the landowner is stewarding the land, and we're sequestering, or in animal sake, we're creating a methane avoidance or offsetting carbon from other aspects. We're qualifying that and we're benchmarking it to a standard. And then we're using calculations within that to create an equivalent of what we feel has been captured in the ground. And then there's pieces around permanence. So how often or how long is it going to stay in the ground? That then gets talked about, and that's how we start to create value and mechanism around the credit itself. But all of that data, as I mentioned, can be rolled up, put onto the blockchain. I think one of the basic things of the blockchain, what I really love about it, carbon included and everything else, is that it creates more trust around data that should be owned by the farmer, no longer owned by a third-party intermediary, and that the data is what it says it is, and it's not going to be manipulated or utilized or changed to serve anyone else's purpose, whether monetized or otherwise. Doesn't mean the data can't change. There's just a ledger for those that are maybe not as up to speed with blockchain. There's just a really good ledger that shows us the data that went in and everything that went to create that data, and then the changes that might happen. So if you're creating an NFT, and that ledger is what I believe going to create more trust that the data is, has a rigor, and it is what we say it is. It isn't being superseded, it isn't being erased, it isn't being manipulated to fit some narrative, and that is that's wonderful, and that's why I love the blockchain so much, and why we're integrating it into everything we're doing specifically on that carbon play. We're seeing some great use cases. If you talk to some of the leaders in the Grow blockchain, or the custodians, I often say, so Grow United, that the custodian of the Grow blockchain, they've got some really good use cases around specifically CPGs that are purchasing carbon NFTs from regenerative outfits. So it's not just pie in the sky talk, it's actually working today, and it's out there and functioning. I'll continue on. So I got to step 5 and then got sidetracked with carbon. So this is how quickly carbon can take conversations and divert us. I'll bring us back to some of those regenerative steps here, as I see some more people trickling into the room here. I mentioned livestock integration. I believe this is a necessary step, even though there's a lot of cropping systems or vegetable or orchard producers that are a little more skeptical about integration of livestock. But it can be as simple as chickens with chicken runs. It doesn't have to be big animals. You can do stepping stones, but the best opportunities when you have a flurd, and that would be a combination of multiple animals. But if you're just a single animal type or a livestock type, that's great as well. I'm certainly accepting of that. animals in nature. I mean, we think about biodiversity, we think about going into the forest, we think about anywhere in nature we go, we see, you know, if you're a park in an urban center, you're seeing squirrels and birds and dogs, and you know, if there's a pond there or a lake, you're seeing fish and different species, and they all kind of work together. And then you think about the critters that go along with that. So the birds eat the insects, and the insects are there, and they're, you know, putting down dung from other animals into the soil, and it all works as this ecosystem functioning together. And we can do the same thing in our managed setups. And so livestock or animals become an essential part to help us propel us towards more regenerative states. So cows grazing are wonderful. If you didn't know much about the benefit of cows, and here's one thing I'd love to leave you with, is that when cows graze on grass, and we understand what they're grazing, but just it really doesn't matter, call it just grass, they will graze to a certain point, but all their saliva that's coming off, and all the dung that's coming out the other end, and all their hoof tromping is actually going to allow that pasture to rebound much quicker and much healthier than if we just mowed it or hayed it and then left it sit. So we're talking about X, you know, 5, X10 factor when we have livestock, simply by saliva and dung and hooves, and those three aspects, pretty much with every animal, but certainly with cattle, are a huge benefit to integration of livestock. And then we can step it up. We can really get into managing livestock onto your pastures, your paddocks. We can talk about nutrient recycling. We can talk about what I like to do is introduce AMP grazing. It's a very regenerative methodology. So you have enough food for 80 heads of cattle, and you put 100 head into that pasture. You create a little bit of competition. You know, we know that humans can thrive with competition. Animals are the same way. This was really, that was done quite a while ago. I remember reading this many moons ago. But if you think about the bison, it was called the Black Thunder. It was millions of bison that were roamed from southern part of America up to the northern part and back, and they were in competition with each other, eating the healthy grasses, and you saw the First Nations, I call them in Canada First Nations, or Indian tribes, sort of following along suit and creating their villages in behind where the bison had grazed, and you know, they found indicators of why the bison weren't grazing in certain areas or avoided certain grasses. It was a strong indication of what was happening in the ecosystem. But that whole black wave is really where this AMP grazing idea came from, which is to create competition. That competition is actually going to create more dung of the back end of a cow. It's going to create more saliva, and then you rotate the cows regularly. So instead of just opening a pasture, letting your cows run free, and then coming to collect them weeks later, you're managing them much more effectively and moving them regularly. And you're actually going to see more rebound in soil and in the grasses and the crops that are growing there. And then we can start to play around with types of grasses for the nutrient components and the animal stock units, and we can get into all those pieces. It gets very technical, as many things do. I try to keep it wide enough and broad enough in these kind of conversations. Those that are agriculturalists certainly are nodding their heads, and those that aren't are hopefully learning something unique. I see a few questions in here, so just give me a sec here as I catch up. You're very welcome for the clarity. You're right. I did start, for those that missed, mushrooms create their own wind. They create, they release the cold moisture bubbles and create a convection system that creates their own wind that help propagate themselves, which is a very unique aspect that I actually just learned today by speaking to a. So I pass that along. I got a question here. What are you most excited about for Grow? That's a great question. Grow to me is I had to pause there because I've got so many amazing, I'd probably rattle off 20 things, but really I want to distill it down to one thing. Grow is demonstrating that this emerging technology can actually do what people have been saying they could do for years. And so proof of action to me speaks volumes. And Grow has figured out as a blockchain how to actually make it work. Not always perfect, they're learning as a blockchain and continuing to improve. But I'm most excited about things that we haven't even gotten into, which are some of the unique projects that we haven't thought about that can be built on our blockchain, on the blockchain itself. The new community members, farmers, ranchers, CEA, controlled environment agriculture that can join, as well as agribusiness. And there's certainly a need for everyone, and we want to be inclusive. Blockchain is a decentralized community, and I think that is really exciting. But I think the piece that really excites me is that you can actually demonstrate. For those of you that follow the blockchain or the Web3 or crypto space, there's so much noise out there of people proclaiming to do things that have these grand aspirations or even coding these grandiose ideas that they never materialize. And so like a lot of different market spaces, but particularly in this one, it's a little bit disheartening. And so to see Grow actually create that mechanism and have that opportunity where farmers can be the hero of the story again, consumers can have more confidence in understanding where the food comes from, how nutritious it is, and have better connection with their farmers, I think is the most amazing thing. And it's really why I wanted to be working with the blockchain and part of the community and helping be additive to the agricultural community. I think the other piece is learning how to create reward systems within the Grow blockchain to incentivize others to be part of it. And so those are people very skeptical of crypto. How do we, engage them so we can have a direct consumer model using this decentralized or DeFi mechanism? How do we reward farmers to share and open source their data so that we can actually see within bioregions and even globally similarities and differences and what's going on with different cropping systems or ranching systems, so we can improve these agriculture zones for the purpose of growing more nutritious food. And so that's another aspect that we haven't even tapped into yet, which is this community sharing, community learning opportunity. I think there's other wonderful aspects of just being able to allow data to be housed on the blockchain and have people really understand what ownership means of that. And so creating smart contracts and sharing that information with different parties in that agribusiness realm is going to help propel or change the conversation on how nutritious our food is and where it comes from, and why consumers really need to be focused on that. I'm hoping, for those of you who joined a little bit later, I'm hoping that's going to entice more people to come back to farming, that we'll have more farmers and not enough land. That's the idea, as opposed to a few farmers that are farming massive amounts of land. We need more farmers in smaller plots to create diversity and opportunity. We also need to just create a different conversation with the grocers, the distribution, and the food manufacturing systems. And so the engagement of the blockchain, I'm very excited about how that's flipping that conversation and empowering the farmer and those working hard at growing, producing our food to be more involved in those conversations, which is going to change the political realm, it's going to change the incentive realm, and all the other mechanisms that go in there. Hopefully that answers your question, Emily. That was a great question. How do you see the community helping it? Wonderful question. For all of you that are on here, those that just joined, as community members and those that may not be, that are just part of the Discord, but certainly those that are community members, I really ask of you to find ways to have farmers reach out to us and have conversations about the benefit of how blockchain can help diversify their operations. That's where I spend a lot of my time, is really trying to engage outside of doing field work in these conversations. It starts with talking to people and having meaningful conversations. It's not a silver bullet, but it certainly is a great opportunity to help. And diversity in the farm field, diversity in your plants, diversity on your balance sheet, blockchain can help in any one of those areas. And so that's what I ask for. The other thing I would ask for is, as we continue to build out our direct-to-consumer, or what I call our crypto mart, that could have a direct-to-business model down the road, but right now direct to consumer. Ask people to be engaged, friends, family, network, go check it out and help them understand that crypto isn't scary, that there's mechanisms to be engaged, even if you don't understand fully. You don't want to be a trader. You're not trying to make millions out of crypto. You just want to engage and support the farmers using this decentralized finance mechanism. Awareness, visibility mechanisms to get there. So you can buy NFT voucher and trade the voucher in some cases to utilize an access product. And there's other mechanisms that some of the Grow United team, the custodians of the blockchain, can certainly help with. But those would be the two things: get farmers talking with us so they can see the benefits and find the synergies, and then consumers to engage with our direct to consumer platform, or NourishMart at the moment. What are some of the top selling points you would approach a farmer / producer to take a look? Yeah, great question. So data ownership, number one, is the top selling point. You own your data. If you're on a production operation right now, there's probably no less than four is the four pieces of software from ag tech that you're utilizing, whether it's in your tractor or your agronomic input data, or some sort of a spectrometry or geospatial imagery, variable rate plans, you name it, the list can go on. Each one of those software pieces, by and large, and there's certainly some that are maybe free to use out there, are some sort of subscription service, whereby you're entering your data and you're basically paying to access your data and then use that data to help you farm better. But you don't own that data, and that becomes a pain point. And so, not that these companies are maliciously trying to take your data, but they have it on centralized servers. They may use it for aggregation, or in some cases they do sell it to aggregators to create different reporting mechanisms. But I really would want, and I think a lot of farmers want to own their own data. They want to know where it's going. They want to know how they can benefit from the data, and so create different monetization schemes and mechanisms, I should say, is probably a better term. And so ownership of data and then monetizing that data in different ways would be two big selling points. The second piece is for those that potentially have great product that isn't contracted away already, a direct-to-consumer model. I talk about the NourishMart all the time as being an access point to engage with consumers with good, sustainable, regenerative food, nutritious food that is, you're going to have a new knowledge in your buyer region and wherever else you may ship. And so that is the second point that I often talk about. And then the third point is actually accessing the ecosystem services, I call it. So all the projects that are being built within the blockchain, that would involve the Kohima regenerative consultancy. And by the way, I'm not plugging it, but I'm going to put it out there as just a piece of truth. For those that are purchasing nodes as an entry point, the key to the blockchain, to the Grow blockchain, the node does a lot of great things. It validates, it verifies, it creates voting mechanisms, it's mining tokens when we start getting into that. But that node, if you buy 3 or more, you can actually retain or access my knowledge base, my consulting advisory services for free. We can help you create regenerative plans. If you're not a farmer and you still buy multiple, you have to come through me. You can designate a farm for me to work with. So you might know a farm within your network, and you might have opportunities and really feel that they could benefit. We've got traceability projects on there, Farm Tracer, that helps create those traceability indexes, both for CPGs or supply chain, as well as consumers, so to understand where the food came from and how it's raised or grown. We also have carbon NFTs, so doing carbon differently, packaging that up in different ways. There's some really neat projects around incentivizing health in connection with food that are being talked about to be built upon our chain, upon the blockchain. So these are other benefits that once I start talking about the value stack proposition of coming on board, Jad, producers really sort of pick their ears up and say, this is great. I get involved. You're very welcome. Those that have been following along, and for those that might have missed it, I was talking about sort of the regenerative model, call it the definition of, what are the steps that I follow. I won't go back over all of it. You can rewatch the recordings, but context, minimizing disturbance, armoring the soil, diversity, keeping living roots, livestock integration. And then one piece, and this is my step 7, that I think is so important, and it's really respecting the farmers and ranchers and environment agriculturalists that have orchard facilities and even tree propagation facilities in terms of growing trees that are going to help reforest different areas. We need to understand what we've learned in the field and figure out what's working and what isn't working, along with all these new principles and techniques. And this is really what I talk about, creating systems of systems, and why agriculture, in my opinion, is the hardest system of systems to sort of put together. Is that we very much in North America have this mentality in the farming industry, being very guarded about some of the secrets that are working on our farm, because too many farmers are chasing yield. We want more yield. We want to get paid for that yield. We're not trying to knock off the farmer beside us, but we want to be a little bit guarded of our information because we want to have bigger yields, bigger bushels, bigger output. But when we start working together and we start actually talking about what's working in our fields, the systems that, the indicators that are presenting some reason to pause and reason to adjust, these pieces need to be aligned with all those other 6 steps that I just talked about. So just because we can put cover crops down doesn't mean we should do it right away. If we're getting in the field indicators that there's a system with a aquifer underneath the soil, if we're dealing with a lot of salinity on the soil, there's been a lot of heavy synthetic chemistry already on there that, putting seed down that isn't going to germinate, is not going to be beneficial for anyone, the soil included. And so we need to really take what we've learned from the field and understand what's good, what's bad, the ugly, the warts and alls, that's sort of the process I go through. And that's where we start to design really impactful plans that are going to actually have longevity and start to regenerate our ecosystems. You notice I don't talk about the word sustainability very much. I do that on purpose. I think sustainability is the end goal. We want to sustain what we actually regenerate, or the systems that we've helped restore. And so I often talk about the longevity. We're creating longevity by starting the mechanism of regenerating our systems. But we can do it at scale. We've proven we can do it at scale, and we can do it on the blockchain. We've proven we can do that as well. There's a wonderful farm. A lot of you that are part of the ecosystem already may have heard or seen it. Royal Farms. They're a production farm. They're doing things at scale. We still have a growing population, and whether it's apples or beef or dairy, they're demonstrating that by applying regenerative thinking about trying to create healthier soils in all aspects, by thinking about creating more easy, natural-based systems, or creating that easy button, working with livestock, working with diversity of livestock, bees and chickens, and the cattle, of course, creating different management systems that we can actually farm regeneratively and meet demand for some of the supply that needs to go out to market. And that food is actually healthier. It's going to help nourish us human bodies more fully. And we have access to it in our Nourishmart today. And so that's wonderful. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. Royal Farms, big plug for them because they're doing things. There's a lot of other great producers on the Nourishmart. I don't want to forget about them. We've got a bunch from Australia that just joined that have really great product. We've got a couple from one from Texas I can think about. We've got a organic tea company in there. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but certainly I'm trying to demonstrate that it can be done at scale, it can be done at small scale. We've proven that, and now it's just continuing to share the benefit of how blockchain is changing the conversation to support the farmer more fully and in every way. And you're absolutely right, McCoy. Royal Farms doesn't terrific beef. And I think I saw Owen on here. He works out at Royal Farms as well. Just pack a lot of the boxes that get shipped out to everyone. So kudos to you, Owen, and thank you for all that you're doing out there. Auntie, I'm trying your steak recipe tonight. Oh, right on. I had leg steak today. I very much looking forward. I have some really good lamb burgers that I'm going to put on later, but looking forward to some protein and continuing to move forward there. I know I've talked a lot about some of that regenerative piece there, and I've answered some questions. We started with, sort of how's the administration and RFK Jr. going to change things? What other great questions can I help answer? I'm here to not be a lecturer, but try to bring some input and share some of my experiences and the things that we're doing. Do we have any farmers in the group here? About 14, 15 of us. Are there any backyard agriculturalists or small, medium production farmers within the group here? Gardener, I'll take that. Fantastic. Do you have a problem with weeds in your garden? And weeds are sort of an anomaly term, but hydro. Yeah. So when we think about weeds, it's really, you can think about it in two different ways. Things that are growing that we don't want growing, that maybe are taking up nutrients away from the things that we'd like. Maybe there's too much of the wrong thing that isn't allowing enough water to infiltrate into the ground or create ponding scenarios. Raised bed gardening is a key example of this, that, the soils don't infiltrate far enough, and so that, creates different mechanisms. One of those interesting plants, and from a phytology standpoint, maybe just a neat little point, is mustard seed. Mustard seed has this chemical that goes into the ground and actually kills off a lot of those invasive grasses. It also creates a lot of different root structures that allow for a lot more penetration of water into the ground. And then if you're adding any nature-based amendments like worm casting or eco-tea, that it allows better absorption or uptake in your tomatoes or your carrots or your cucumbers. So if you're thinking about how to eradicate a problem plant that is affecting some of your growth, think about mustard seed. Raised bed gardening, I certainly appreciate that. My own family farm, we've got a market garden area, about 5 acres, and we've got some raised beds in there as well as in situ. One thing I'd say with raised beds, fruiticulture, if you haven't looked at it, if you do have a chance, maybe to turn the soil, if you've created another, put your biomass left over from brush cutting or from composting into the bottom, and then add your soils on there, and you're going to have a lot more biology happen in the soil and have to put less input or less amendment onto the soil. The other thing is I very much recommend not having a closed bottom, and if we can, put it on top and have an in situ grow. So, providing the opportunities for tap roots to go past your raised bed and into the ground. And during the winter time, we can cover it with third cut alfalfa or get a very high content alfalfa-like or hay-like material. It's going to allow the worm population to really do things. And when I talk about not having a bottom, those worms will go bury down into the soil further past your raised beds. And in the springtime, you're going to have an abundance of grass around your raised beds, and you're going to have nourishment of opportunity. So think about some of those. I have a friend that raises wagyu that I'd like to introduce. Wonderful, Chad. Speaking of wagyu or any beef producer, one of the neat things we can talk about is leveraging the blockchain to create NFTs that ride with, from the purchase of that cattle through the raising of that cattle and the sale of that cattle. And that NFT can accompany the sale of that cattle. It can be sold separately. And so it's actually a monetized opportunity that's providing we ran some numbers with actually a Wagyu producer. They're not 100% baked in, but 20 to 50% increase in profitability simply by looking at how NFTs can be a benefit for capturing that data and rider with the life cycle of that cattle. So love that conversation. Love to dive into it. We've got some good models around that. That's fantastic. I'm going to definitely try the mustard seed right on, Coco. That's fantastic. Let me know. There's different varieties too. You can ping me up on here on the Discord channel, or you kohima.io, Neil at kohima.io. Drop me a line if you have some issues or want to find out where you are, the type of mustard seed variety. Certainly happy to put you in touch. There's a lot of seed companies out there. With pedigree seed, I typically look for pedigree seed, so they're sort of non-modified varieties, particularly with mustard, and help you out with that. These are really great questions. So for those of you that don't know, I do have a smallhold regenerative farm in Saskatchewan, Canada, and right on the riverbank. I try to practice arable regenerative farming and integration of a living pond system. So that might be an interesting topic. Ponds, water, and I believe somebody asked about water issues in Utah, and I'll get to that in a second. That just reminded me. But when we think about ponds and we think about digging out ponds, I really want to think about what's going to live in that from a nature-based development. So instead of just being a body of water on maybe your acreage or in the middle of your field, think about the animals or the plants that are going to circulate, that are going to create some oxygen that's going to go back into the water, the fish and the birds and ducks that are going to feed it. You can actually raise ducks or have ducks on your property and tend to them and have them housed around that. The living pond system is typically where I like to go because you can use that. It's actually got more microorganisms in it if you do pull off it for any kind of irrigation, drip irrigation in particular. So it becomes a multi-purpose, and I like to value stack ecological systems to get together to create that benefit. So if you're thinking about a pond, don't just have a body of water sitting there in a hole. Think about the use of integrating grasses and plants and even small shrubs around the outside, and then helping it with some fish. Just do some research, and you can certainly reach out to me about the types of fish, if you're going to put any in there, and other aqua creatures that are going to be beneficial. And if you do draw off it for any reason, it's going to have some better outputs. What's your favorite hack? I'm going to get to the favorite hack in 1 second here. I do want to circle back to that question asked me on the Discord channel before we started this session, which is maybe it wasn't. It was a question around water in Utah, and what I want to mention about that. There's a small water cycle and there's the large water cycle, and often what I talk about from a regenerative viewpoint or an agroecologist viewpoint is fixing the small water cycles. And these are the microclimate water cycles that we have control to help stimulate. A large water cycle is what the earth does, the moon shifting, the clouds moving, and those systems will be acted by us, helping spur on these small water cycles. Utah is a very interesting state. If you look at any statistical information, the U.S. water consumption for irrigation and for agriculture is about 33% of the overall water consumption. In Utah, as a state by itself, I believe it's close to 80, like 76 or 78% of water use goes to agriculture, primarily irrigation purposes. And so there's a lot of demand for the water, and there's a finite amount of water that is sort of within the aquifers, and then you get into water rights and access. We can do a lot of things on a land, and particularly those in Utah closer to the mountain ranges. We can create swale system or water catchment basements. For those running cattle, here's an interesting tip and maybe another benefit of why you want to run livestock. If you run livestock in a path, they actually have a hoof print that goes down about an inch, inch and a half. During a typical rainfall on a paddock, 100-acre or so, you can catch upwards of 20,000 gallons of water just in these trenches from the hooves. And so if you crisscross your cattle on your land in ways that they're herd mentality, so they're following the leader, you're going to create your own natural water catch basins. And then if you can put a series of deeper holes or deeper swale systems that you actually have the world's best water, which is rainwater, at your disposal to utilize, to pump out, to have for cattle and help irrigate anything that is needed, and certainly help reduce the impact on the already heavy draw for their production irrigation that's happening in Utah. But this can happen in any agriculture system makeup. There's certainly a great emphasis on water conservation, and so those around fresh body waters systems, particularly rivers, streams, and if you get up into the mountain regions where there's some snowpack, capturing that water and not damming up natural streams, but creating some microclimate conditions where moisture rises and it actually starts to create rainfall. We do that by planting certain tree types, by creating beeline cuts into our soils. And what we're really trying to do is spur on a natural water cycle, a rain cycle. And so these mini water cycles are very important to our ability to help with the huge demand on water and help the dependency on irrigation. There's certainly some wonderful areas in agriculture regions globally that don't have as much concern around irrigation and water. But certainly in Utah, and I know that question may come up, that as one of the things that we don't need to depend on it. It isn't actually, from my perspective, something that is as detrimental, because we can actually create some small water cycles. We can utilize the systems that we've learned to help maintain and utilize water more effectively in water management practices. Hopefully that answers that question. What's your favorite hack is another question. Space for farming or gardening. Yeah, this is wonderful. So in cropping systems, so where we're growing crops, still having cattle through that, but primarily for the crops, particularly in really hot climate where you get a lot of sunburn on different crops, I really love to introduce worm casting tea. And I use it as a sunblock. It's my hack. It actually goes on as a foliar. So for those aren't familiar with the term foliar, it's we're feeding the leaves and the leaves are absorbing whatever we're spraying on it. And so the worm casting tea has a number of benefits in the soil, but it also does a lot of cool things. And one of those things is actually spraying it on as a foliar. There's some edible components from the leaf, it'll absorb the minerals and biology that it needs. But what it does is it acts like a sunblock. And so when you have a lot of drought issues or burn off on your field for different crops, think about applying that. It's a great hack. In the gardening system, one of the things that I really loved is utilizing of cross-pollination to create some very unique tasting plants. And so utilizing in between your raised gardens, if you've got hardier soil or sandier loam soil, and we can certainly talk about soil types and makeup, hascap berry bushes, if you're in the northern climate, are great to keep in there, and we've different varieties and need cross-pollination, but they also propagate and help pollinate some of your more traditional fruits and veggies, and you can actually get different flavor profiles because of that. So it's a neat hack. I certainly also am a big fan of grafting in orchards, small scale market garden orchards, and grafting different these together that maybe have fallen over or got snapped off because of beavers. And so repurposing them and not just creating biomass or burning it, but grafting it and creating some beneficial opportunities to create very unique species. one of the things that happened in Canada, we have a bush, some of you may know it, called the sea buckthorn. Wonderful, tasty, but so prickly. Like it is hard to harvest the berries off of it. We use the shaking method, but it's a great nitrogen fixer. So if you use it in small scale orchards, in larger scale tree propagation, where we need more nitrogen fixing component in the soil to help with the nitrogen cycle. And so sea buckthorn does. But because of grafting and because of exactly what I talked about, the hacking of beavers eating the trees and falling over, there was a farmer that actually has been able to create a non-prickly sea buckthorn bush. And so you can access the berries. They taste slightly different, but still wonderful and have a huge antioxidant benefit. Wonderful for juices, wonderful for pies, wonderful for numerous different recipes. So both a hack to think about sea buckthorn and about grafting, thinking about the cross-pollination of some hardier bushes that creates different profiles on your vegetables. In particular, cucumber, I hear this at the farmer's market, tastes very woody when we grow it very naturally, and some people don't like that taste. But you can actually change that by just changing some of the pollination pieces that go around growing cucumbers and even the soil type makeup. And so getting very technical with what kind of soil and kind of amendments and what kind of pollination will create some more flavor for salacious veggies if you're finding it a little bit woody. The last hack that I think is maybe underrated, but certainly gains a lot of notoriety and sort of larger production side is a little thing called biochar. So you can actually create biochar again through the biomass on your own small properties, backyard properties. It's an ash-like byproduct through heating up your biomass and then reapplying it. It's got tremendous properties, something I certainly lean to as sort of a secret sauce in some of the systems that we're regenerating, some of the soil types that we're creating more functionality out of. So I encourage you to think about that. Does that give you some good tips there? And hello to, I see there's a few more that have joined us. Glad you've made it and glad you're here. Thanks for being here. Just going to pull up a quick stat. I just want to be accurate about it. So I'm not talking out of thin air here. In relation to biochar, so what up? So if you apply biochar on production level, in certain bioregions, it can actually slash water use by about 30%. And so there's a famous quote by thought leader in regenerative space, John Kemp, I believe. John Kemp or Graham Sate, and I forget which one, I apologize. But it really focuses on saying that healthy plants don't need as much water uptake. They don't need as much water generally if they're healthy. The reason we apply water and the reason we apply amendments is because there's something wrong in our soils and there's a binding of the nutrients and the uptake, and so we cut the lawn, and so water is an aspect of that. But those that are worried about water and the component, healthy plant actually takes less water than they would expect. So. 30%. That's I feel great to see you here. Nina. I didn't capture that video recording, Dana. So if you want to type that out or send it again, here. I mean, biochar interests me. I understand trees have their own carbon cycles. Yeah, absolutely. When you start thinking about forestry or agroforestry, there's a different cycle, and it's just a different species, so it's creating, and it's very unique into its own. That's why it's got its own whole category. Forestry itself, it's a carbon cycle, and it works in symbiosis. So if you have a forestry system that is attached or opposed to agriculture production fields. They both have their own carbon cycles, but they work in synergy with each other. But you're absolutely right. And the emissions, both the pull down and the release through respiration of carbon is different with trees versus production crops. And so great, Chad, and something that we've got some great people that I know in my work network. I've got a good friend of mine who is in Spain, who's a PhD in soil science and a thesis around biochar, and he's probably say up there in the thought leaders about the benefits. And I bring him in to provide some good stats. But certainly, if you ever have any deep questions, I'm happy to have a conversation with him and also introduce you, because he loves talking about it probably as much as I do. So keep that in mind. Another thing about stats, I'm just going to tell you, in Asia, in a totally different agricultural bioregion, rice paddies are about 12 million acres of that agriculture ecosystem, and biochar cuts methane emissions for the cattle that are in there about 50%. And so there's a drawdown effect by utilizing biochar within those rice paddies. So certainly a huge help in this world. And again, it's a bridge product. My ideal state is that we get to a regenerative system, and it's going to look differently around the world, where we're not adding these inputs, we're not having to, the system's regenerating by itself, and we're getting nutritious food. We have a long way to go to regenerate. How do you measure and track microbiome diversity to assess long-term soil health improvements? A wonderful question. Ongoing question that continues to come up. This is done through soil sampling, utilization of soil and sap sampling. That is how we get a baseline, how we see improvements. MRV machines, as we think about measure, record, and validate, and there's many different ones out there that are using LiDAR or non-soil disturbance technology, spectrometry, and geospatial technologies through satellite. That's how we're doing a lot of our measurement. And then quantification or analysis through big learning systems to correlate data in different bioregions to say, here's a typical case given the crop type, soil type, environmental type, climatic positioning, and that's how we look forward to create these formulas that help create value for carbon credits when we get there, but also just gives us the indicators of improving of that microbiome and soil health. And BOG, I love that name, by the way. The one thing that I'd love for you to take away is, regardless of all the sampling and tests we do, my big piece is functional soil health. It needs to function for the ecosystem that you're working within, and you'll understand that it's starting to function more effectively when you're applying less amendments, you're applying less water, you have less pests, you have less diseases, and the soil, if you actually dig it and you smell it, this is called observational, part of my context analysis and the regenerative steps that I follow. It smells good. It almost creates a salacious saliva in your mouth. Like, it's got an aroma. You'll know dead earth. You'll know earth that's not alive. You'll smell it, and it smells very good, or it doesn't smell at all. And so that is a key indicator that your soil is functioning effectively. And so please don't dismiss the human intervention of observation and smelling to give you indications of microbiome production. And if you are trying to get your crappy soil, as you said, to function more effectively, worm casting is probably a great starting spot. Worms act as your little mini soldiers in the ground. You can have different worm types, so do spend some time or ask me on where you're located. Red wrigglers or European night crawlers or African night crawlers, and there's different species that go deeper or further. But worms are shredders, so they shred, and that's why they're really good in the soil. They also create tunnels, capture water, and help with carbon capture and the nitrogen cycle, and they act as beneficial connectors between all the biology down there, so they eat bad things and help push out sugars and move nodules off of roots in different ways. And so worms become your first line of defense, if you're thinking about it from a series of team members that are going to help you, and then you can start adding on biochar, and you can start doing different things by plant diversity types, but I would start with forecasting. Electroculture. Yes. This is a very polarized topic. Polarized because much like the blockchain, or much like this emerging technology or the space of Web3, there's probably two schools of thought on its effectiveness, or even if it's trustworthy application. I would say by and large, there's an ether, right? There's this vibration, there's an energy. I would be one that sits in the camp that I believe that there is a benefit to electroculture. Small to mid scale is probably where the effectiveness is. As you get to production scale, it loses effectiveness. But maybe that has less to do with my experience in not pushing the parameters and the amount of copper that you're going to need on production scale. But certainly small market gardens, small farms, even up to mid-size diverse farms, utilizing capturing of these vibrational energies in the ether and drawing them down to the ground to stimulate. It's kind of like twanging for worms when you move a stick and you vibrate it and the earthworms come up. That's basically what robins do on the ground. They vibrate the earth and earthworms come up. We're doing that in the reverse with electroculture, and we're bringing those, that energy back into the ground and creating that stimulation of both electrical currents and vibrations, and they kind of could be one the same depending on how scientific you want to get. But they're creating a good vibration. And if you do read a book, to take away a book from here, it was one I read just recently, and I shared it with the Pro team, called Good Energy, and it's more about the good energies around your physical health, by Dr. Casey Means, I believe her name is, but Dr. Means. It's sort of along the same lines of this electroculture, except it was on the human body and the vibrations that happen within our endosphere. And certainly I'm an advocate for it. I think copper can be costly, and so I would recommend not buying things you see on Amazon, because I don't know if they're actually going to be beneficial or not. But going to your electrical store, just creating tape and creating, you can find YouTube videos. The cone effect works a little bit better, and raised beds and small plots and orchards, these can be things that help create more life in the ground and help your plants. Horticulture, yeah. Big fan of horticulture. Horticulture doesn't have to be the big sort of pile that you build up where you're growing on both sides. You can do it raised beds. You can do it just taking a hole and putting your biomass in there. I'm a big fan of not buying biomass. You can find biomass in a lot of different small farms, or going to your dump. Often they have byproduct from tree surfaces, or different earthworks that drop stuff off. So grab some of that, repurpose, reuse, recycle that to create your horticulture beds. A lot of diversity in there, and realize that it is probably going to have some mycelium that happens. You're going to get some white crustation, and it's don't think it's bad. Might get some mushrooms in there. Sometimes you have a little bit of a adverse effect with your crop before you get your benefit. Stick with it. You don't have to over-index the application of amendments, but the decomposition takes some time to break it down. And probably one of the things that I put on is I go to urban centers. So I have a small little farm in Saskatchewan, Canada. So I'll go to Saskatoon, and during the fall, when all the leaves are falling and everyone's raking them up and putting them in bags, I just ask people if I can grab their bags of leaves, and that's what I dump into horticulture, because the leaves break down and create wonderful compost, but also basis for horticulture beds. Have you talked with many farmers that are stressing about the compliance for the smarter food and safety blueprint? Yeah, The short answer is yes, Jed. This, along with a lot of other, what I would call strength points for farmers as it relates to climate initiatives, encompassing whether it's fooder, traceability, health components, carbon obviously being one of them, standardization of labeling if they have products going to consumers. It all is a concern point, and often there's these grants or rebates or subsidies that are put out there to help with adoption but are applied or taking advantage of it in the wrong ways. And I think there's a lot of discussion I've had with different administrative bodies that are rolling out these programs that, you know, if we can help demonstrate more regenerative system thinking, as opposed to pushing an agenda and align with the outcomes. The outcomes are more important than the journey to get there, and we can certainly access some of that funding to help us with that. But yes, in short, it is a concern, along with a lot of the other demands and initiatives that are coming. But I think these are good questions, and I think this also helps spur on why blockchain can help benefit farmers, if nothing else, to create a rigor and a ownership of that data and an immutable source that helps share that with these bodies, that is going to provide more peace of mind and trust all the way through to the consumer. And maybe even engage some of these governmental bodies to think about how we administer subsidies and rebates for these programs. It's something that in my production planning and part of that piece that I talk about in understanding your goals and what the functionality is, that context piece that we certainly cover and talk about. And that changes from state to state. You know, if we're talking farmers that are growing a lot of corn in the Midwest, the Z94, safe aviation fuel, biodiesel, biofuel sector is a huge topic, and you know how they're being affected and impacted by that. Concern, positive benefits. Safe aviation fuel groups are dumping a lot of money in to get corn off the fields and process that. People think that because of the amount of chemistry going on, it's better to be used for fuel than to be used for fodder or for feed for animals or into the human production, food production. But we certainly have a lot of these sort of very interesting localized and colloquial scenarios going on that come into play. Tree culture in my bed, so I wouldn't have to go so deep with the soil. It's been 4 years and starting to compost and break down. Great. Just add more compost and dirt every year. Have a lot of nice earthworms now. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, the great opportunity to stimulate that with maybe biochar code if you wanted to sort of help that along and create a stepping stone. And then think about some tap roots, daikon radishes that you can put in there. And I often think about the roots of daikon radishes and viticulture systems. They kind of grab everything and bring it together and they squeeze it. So they help press some of that decomposition and creating an imagery effect. It's not quite that superpowery, but you know, those taproot systems, as the decomposition's happening and you're already getting some progress, help spur along and create some different mechanisms. Just be careful. Daikon radishes, deer really like. So if you're in an area prone to deer, either have a deer fence up or a fence around it, because they will source out daikon radishes like you wouldn't believe, and will disturb your beds at a lot of times. So careful, but nature's wildlife as it comes along. Great questions, by the way. Thank you very much for all your engagement. And for those of you that are new, I've seen some new people joining, popping in and out. Don't hesitate to write your messages or questions down. I'm trying to follow along as closely as possible. You can also open up your audio if you have that and ask a question if you felt so inclined. But I'm here to answer your questions. For those of you who don't know, I am based in Canada, but I have worked in a lot of different agriculture zones on a global basis, being very involved in a lot of the upstream and the downstream of agriculture, so production, from the field all the way through to supply chain. Having some very interesting conversations in the last few weeks around engaging farmers in a Pan-African ecospace, which I'm really encouraged about. I think there's some great mechanisms there that, again, the blockchain is going to help change the conversations and maybe create a different opportunity through the DeFinance model, crypto or token, to get them engaged in a larger way, and also create different mechanisms of trade. One thing that's really happening for those of you that love coffee, I'm one of those people. The specialty coffee market space in South America has really sort of had some very unfortunate environmental impacts, which is creating some shortage of specialty coffee, Arabica coffee. But the African continent, on the other hand, is thriving, and so trying to spur on some different trade opportunities and maybe engage green bean opportunities vis-a-vis adding data in our blockchain, and having buyers come and recognize the benefits of these regenerative farms in Africa growing Arabica coffee and getting some more of those green beans over to our North America soils or continent to be processed. So it's a wonderful world. This very small agriculture space, though it seems very large some days. It's also very small, but continue to see the benefits of what blockchain, NFTs, conversation of ownership of data, and how we're opening the eyes for different market spaces to engage with Coral platform and then the producers that are getting involved with us. I have to keep one headphone off because I get this echo chamber if I got both on. So if you see me adjusting my headphones, I had to do that.
Well,
I missed a few items. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna thank you for coming on here and for everyone else for showing up. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but if anyone has any more questions, please ask now. We'd love to have you again in the future, and keep the questions coming. Neil is active on the Discord, so you can probably catch him on there. So we'll keep the conversation going, even if we're not in one of these Q&As. But yeah, thanks again for everyone coming.
Really appreciate it, everyone. Look forward to chatting to you in the future. Thanks for being part of the community. Those that aren't, reach out to us. We'd love to have you part of the community. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Got a couple people typing, just saying, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
All right, Neil, seriously, thanks. That was great. You have a good rest of your evening.
Really appreciate it, Brian. Yeah, you too. Thank you.